PhD in Progress, Episode 8. This week, I talked to former PhD student Doug Swanson about his decision to leave grad school and his advice to current grad students who might be considering an exit from academia. Let's go!
You said your conversation with Doug was very, very straightforward and to the point?
Straightforward and to the point.
Uh-huh. It was pointed? Pointy?
Pointy.
Okay. You had a pointy conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back to the PhD in Progress podcast, where we talk about your education, your career, and your life. I'm Jason.
I'm Nikhil. And today we're going to be talking to Doug Swanson, who was at one point a PhD student and is no longer.
And also no relation to Ron Swanson, my personal hero. You might not know him, but he is the greatest man to walk the earth.
So I've heard a lot of things about this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should watch the documentary.
Yeah, and sadly, Abigail couldn't join us today because she is busy being hooded. And by that I mean she is...
officially being granted her doctorate of philosophy from molecular biology in a weird ceremony where they wear weird things and get even more weird things placed upon their necks for some reason.
And that sounds really uncomfortable to me because it's like 85 degrees today, and so I don't know if I want to wear academic regalia in the sun, but that's what she's busy doing, and we're very proud of her. Again, continue to be proud of her.
Be awesome, Abigail.
Yeah.
Continue that.
And we were wondering how we were ever going to be as funny without her on the show today.
And we're not.
Yeah.
We'll never be.
Sorry, guys. Today, not funny. But we wanted to talk a little bit about perspective. So this show is about realizing when the PhD that you're currently progressing through is not necessarily the right path. So it's about how to do that cost-benefit analysis, how to take a step back and look at your training in the context of your life and your career and make the hard decision to leave if it's the right decision for you. And so Jason interviewed Doug, I think a week ago. Or I guess there's no time. Time doesn't exist on this podcast. But it was a previously recorded interview, and I think it kind of stands on its own. It speaks for itself. So without further ado, here's Doug and Jason.
Hey everyone, this is Jason with the PhD in Progress podcast, and I'm here with one of my good friends, Doug Swanson. Hey, Doug.
Hey, Jason.
How you doing, man?
Such a pleasure to talk to you.
All right.
I wish I saw you more.
Oh, well, you see me right now, and the listeners don't get to.
That's true. Their loss.
So we have Doug today because we want to talk about the decision to potentially leave grad school, and Doug was in grad school for how many years? 2, 3?
I finished my third year, and then I left after that.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your grad school experience? You know, what were you studying, and, you know, why you came to grad school to begin with?
Well, I was studying physics, specifically focusing on biophysics. Why I came to grad school to begin with is a little bit ill-defined, to be honest. I didn't really have a plan, I didn't have a life goal, and I didn't have a professional goal. I actually entered specifically with a mind to keep pursuing science until I stopped enjoying it. It was more of a, you know, a process or an activity than it was a goal for me.
And was your decision to go to grad school mostly because, you know, you'd done well in undergrad in your physics field, and it was just the natural next step?
Basically, and I didn't have anything else that I wanted to do more. I didn't have a job. I didn't particularly want to get a job. I rather enjoyed the academic environment, and I liked the intellectual, you know, variety and challenge. I did make a point to myself that this was a life choice. It was my life I was playing with here, and so, you know, I had to be enjoying it at all times. And so I actually sort of made a pact with myself that I would go to grad school because I thought I would enjoy it, and if at any point I decided I didn't enjoy it, I would leave.
And did you have experience with grad school before in grad as an undergrad? Did you have any exposure to grad student life and what that would be like, or did you just kind of jump in?
I had exposure to a various selected pool of graduate students with whom I worked in labs in undergrad. I spent a couple of summers in labs at undergrad, and so I met the graduate students who were in those labs and were there all the time. I don't think I would say that I had exposure to their way of life, and I definitely don't think I had exposure to their mentality. So I think that I was as much of a novice as anyone going in.
I see. So you had more of an idea of what they did when you saw them in lab, but not so much what it was like to be a grad student when you're outside of doing the work part.
I felt like I understood the research as the day-to-day, let's say, but I don't think I understood kind of the existential feeling, or the lifestyle, or the length of the whole process.
So I guess going off of that, why don't we talk a little bit about what you think of that existentialism, or what you're trying to get at with those last couple of comments?
Well, the statements I'm going to make reflect my personal biases, and I feel like I need to qualify that ahead of time. Certainly the feelings that I felt are common amongst many graduate students, a great many, at least in my limited, admittedly, experience. But it is the case that, that these were my feelings and should not be taken as canon. That said, I often felt that grad school was kind of an endless or aimless process. I didn't feel that there was a lot of institutional support, especially from the physics department. And quite frankly, the only support I ever received was from my advisor personally, who was terrific. He was fantastic. In return, I really enjoyed the fact that there was a lot of freedom or flexibility, and basically I was on my own to study and learn what I wanted, which for a while is a really wonderful thing. And then after a while, you start to wonder why you're really here. What are you really doing? Is anyone actually going to help you get past this stage in your life? You feel a little bit like an extended teenager.
So was one of the major difficulties for you just having that lack of feedback that you might expect at maybe a more formal job, where you have a boss who's actually reviewing your work constantly, or there are numbers or sales statistics that might go into how you're doing as a worker?
No, to be honest, I don't think that. I don't think that was a problem for me. It wasn't that I needed more feedback. I think it was that I didn't really see the point of it all. The end result of a serious program of research is a paper in a journal that garnered you prestige and the chance of maybe a job and a readership of people totaling 5 or 10 around the world. And I couldn't get excited about that after a while. I can't really explain it any better than that. It wasn't something that I found compelling.
So it was more the output of academic work wasn't really that appealing.
Well, I knew I didn't want to be a professor, and I just decided one day that, not one day, I decided over a long period of time that I didn't find it fun. I can't really explain it any better than that. To some degree, it's just a personal preference. I found the problems we were working on interesting, at least sometimes. But the process of publication was an enormous drain, and there was a lot of political posturing, and at the end of the day, I didn't feel that what I was doing was going to make any serious impact on anything.
So I know you also had another interesting aspect to your life while you were doing your grad student work, and it's that you were working at various companies or doing coding. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this was undoubtedly a major contributor to the feelings of stress and negativity I had at the end of my graduate school tenure, which was I was working two jobs. In addition to graduate school, I was working a second job as a programmer, basically at nights, for a security company, which I still work at now, Malwarebytes. We make Windows anti-malware software, and I had helped to start this company. I guess in the summer of 2008, which was the summer between college and graduate school, and I had intended for it to be kind of a summer project just for fun, and it ended up evolving into something that required serious attention, which I was able to maintain for the first several years in graduate school. But as the pressure and the workload ramped up, it just became untenable.
Mm-hmm. So you basically started a company, I guess, while starting grad school.
Before starting grad school. But yeah.
But then you kept it up.
Right.
I mean,
it was a lot of work.
Yeah, that seems like so much more work than I could ever imagine doing.
Well, and I found myself shirking in ways that I wasn't comfortable with. I found myself having to shortchange grad school, to be honest, to keep up with the programming gig, and I felt uncomfortable with the implications of that, especially given that my advisor Ned Green was so terrific to me and so supportive, and I felt he deserved better than the halftime I was giving him towards the end.
Mm-hmm. So you felt like you were basically balancing. On one hand, you had this business that you had helped start and you'd been running throughout your time as a grad student, and on the other hand, you had this other academic venture just going on. Undertaking your own independent work and working under your advisor Ned.
Right.
And so were you weighing one versus the other the whole time?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the relative weights changed over time. At the beginning, and I would say for most of the first 2 years, grad school won out. During the middle of the second to the middle of the third year, it started transitioning.
Yeah.
So, as the company started taking off and needing more of my time.
So what was the winning? You said grad school was winning out. What was
winning for more of my time?
Oh, for more of your time. Okay, I see. I mean, obviously you chose to leave grad school after 3 years, and this isn't a PhD program for those who are listening who might be in master's programs or whatever. But there was something about the business. Did you just feel that it aligned more with what you were interested in as a whole?
So a few reasons. I had received my master's, so I had reached a benchmark which was of professional usefulness. I also, as I said at the beginning, this was, to me, I never felt I was a student. I felt I was a person who was doing some studying. I felt that I would stay in school so long as it was interesting and compelling and sensible in the span of my life. But I felt important to conceptualize that I was living my life the whole time, and I had some other life interests that I wanted to pursue. Notably that. I wanted to move with my girlfriend, who was starting PhD at Brown in Providence, and I wanted to live with her. We had been apart for about 6 months. She had lived in Denmark for the previous 6 months, and I had actually been flying to Denmark for weekends sometimes, which was kind of awful. And I wanted to live with her, and as a result, I would have either had to commute back and forth to Princeton, which is where I was living at the time, or I would have had to drop one of the jobs I was doing, basically. I didn't think there was time to both do both jobs and start a family, basically. Yeah. A serious family. When you couple that together with the fact that the business had been doing well and kind of taking off, and the fact that I wasn't all that excited about the concrete ramifications of graduate school. I didn't feel I needed the professional credentialing for anything I wanted to do. It seemed like the sensible choice for me to keep moving ahead with my life, basically.
And it seems like you've had a very logical flow and kind of very intentional in what you were doing and analyzing, what made sense to you, what didn't make sense to you, what was important, what wasn't as important.
Yeah, it was really very simple. I optimized the whole time for local happiness. I did what I thought was making me happy at the time, and for a while that was studying. I found studying to be, stimulating and enjoyable. I made an incredible community of friends in graduate school. The intellectual stimulation was amazing. The flexibility was amazing. When there came more societal or time pressure factors that pushed me to do something else with my time, I optimized for local happiness then too, and I moved in with my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. It was really as simple as that for me.
So did you feel a sense of obligation at all? Did you feel like maybe you were throwing away this opportunity because you did get into a PhD program at a great university that's very well known for its physics department? Did you feel like you had some obligation to the school or to, whoever or whomever before I get yelled at?
So yes is the short answer. And it would have been to two separate people. One would have been to my advisor, Ned, who had invested a lot of time and effort in me. And quite frankly, I still feel a little bit guilty. I feel like like I let him down a little. And I know this is just sort of part of the game. That as a professor, you take on students and, you work with them, and sometimes they join your research program and sometimes they don't. But I still do feel a little guilty for that. The other group of people to whom I had some sort of obligation were my parents, who had a lot, pride on the line, invested in me getting a PhD just so they could say that their son was a doctor. And I just, had to deal with that because it was the right thing for me to do.
So actually, let's back up a little bit. So you make this decision and you're like, okay, I'm going to pursue this business that I basically raised from its inception and go more with that and leave grad school. What's the first thing you do? Are you talking with your advisor the whole time and going through this process, or with your friends, or at one day did you just wake up and you're like, okay, I need to do this? And
no, this was probably a 12 to 18 month story. Probably in the middle of second year, I started wondering what it was all for, and wondering whether it was for me. Mm-hmm. I didn't actually do anything about it until the end of third year, so it would have been maybe 14 months later. I definitely, my primary support structure was definitely friends, and my friends were in the loop with this, the entire way, because quite frankly, it was a bit of a support group. I don't know too many graduate students who didn't have these feelings, not just at some point, but around the same periods of time in their lives. You usually go through this. Most people went through this somewhere between second and third year, and then again around the end of third year into fourth year. And by the middle of fourth year, they're just kind of pressing through to get it finished with. Mm-hmm. So most people go through this, at least I found, in 18 to 24 month cycles. So my friends were with me the entire time because they were going through the same kinds of feelings.
Yeah, that's great. And that's really important to have some kind of support. It really depends on what kind of PhD program you might be in, or grad school program in general. I know the community we have it's kind of nice because we're at a school that's centrally located. Everyone lives fairly close to it. It's not in a city, so there's not that weird sprawl that you might get from, just having different people in different apartments all around.
It was a wonderful place. It really was. Yeah. And the community of people was incredible. There was no denying it.
Yeah.
I also should point out that I'm quite sure that if I had finished the program, I would have been, I would have found ways to make myself happy there as well. Mm-hmm. It just so happened that life threw me for a loop and I wanted to move.
Let's jump a little into the actual physical ending process, right? You've made this decision. You talked to your advisor, who sounds like he was very supportive the whole time.
He was. I can't say enough good things about him. Yeah. I basically told him I wanted to take a leave of absence because I wasn't sure at that point what I wanted to do long term. I thought that there was a good possibility that the business would fold, and that I might indeed want to finish my PhD. And I originally asked for a year off, and he said, okay, I'll see you if and when you get back.
Wow, that's great.
He was supportive and communicative for the next 2 years, basically, while I wrestled with the decision of whether I was going to come back. And if anybody is considering working for Ned Wingreen, you should do it because he's incredible.
Wow, such a plug. I'll have to let him know about this episode.
He deserves it.
Yeah, he seems like a great guy. One of the interesting things is that you, as opposed to other students who might be going through a similar questioning phase and maybe decide to exit, you didn't really have to deal with a job search because you had something essentially lined up for you already.
Right. So I'm not sure how generalizable my situation is, as I've said, earlier in this interview, because I didn't have any opportunity cost basically at all. I already had a place to live. I already had, social support. I was moving to live with my girlfriend. I already had employment, and I had an advisor who supported the institutional move. There was really no systemic opposition or obstacle of any kind. I said, this is what I want to do. And everyone in my life said, okay.
When you finalized that decision and you initiated your leave of absence, how long into that leave of absence were you like, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing for, the rest of the time? I'm not really returning back.
I would say it took 2 years to make the final decision not to return. After about 6 months, I think I knew that the odds were it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
I definitely continued the leave of absence for the next 2 years, intending to keep the fallback option open. And I was open with my advisor about that. And he was, again, supportive of it. Mm-hmm. But I think I knew that the odds were that I wasn't coming back pretty much immediately. And again, it was an optimization for local happiness. If I had decided that I wasn't happy at some point and that going back to grad school would have made me happy, I would have done it.
Yeah.
But I was pretty comfortable in the new life with my girlfriend, now my wife, here in Providence.
And was there any pushback from the department or the school? Were they ever trying to get you back to school or
no?
Okay.
And therein lies one of the ultimate pressures or bitternesses that led me to leave. I never felt that anybody at the institution other than Ned cared about me.
Yeah, that's rough. I'm thinking back to my department and
the institutional folks. I mean, obviously the other students were incredibly supportive, but the department and the other professors never really gave me the time of day.
Wow, that's a shame. It really is.
It's a common story.
I feel lucky in that. I mean, my department, the molecular biology department, and at least people in it. And
I do, and you guys were far better supported than the physicists were, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and that's
I always felt that your department was far warmer and more inviting.
Yeah, and that's how I feel talking to graduate students, not only at the institution we went to, but schools across America. I don't know too much about other international schools, but I've gotten the feeling that my department's been very active in the support of raising students to essentially do what they want or feel like they need to do. And that's one of the reasons we do this podcast, is to help others, I guess, gain that support. We want to be a support system for people. We want to allow people to establish support systems for themselves and their own departments and friends and colleagues.
Well, look, I'm not really interested in criticizing any particular program or my own program or any particular institution. I think it's great that you folks are doing this because I think that if anybody doesn't know that everyone's going through this, they should know that everyone's going through this, pretty much every student. And the basic fact of the matter is that, it is a very good experience in a lot of respects. You meet terrific people, you work on interesting problems, you have a lot of flexibility and freedom. And, if it makes you happy, do it as long as it makes you happy.
So let's talk about a little happier thing. We've been so Not sad,
I don't mean to be negative.
no, not at all.
Because for the most part, I really enjoyed my experience, at least for the first several years. But as I said, kind of life threw me curveballs. I come off as a little negative. I have a feeling because a lot of people I know who have been through graduate school or who are still going through graduate school are feeling many of the same kinds of, endlessness. What do I do next? Nobody's giving me any professional direction. A lot of people are wondering, basically, how do I take the last 5 years of my life and give them meaning?
How has the other side been? You've left grad school, like 3 years ago now? 2 years ago?
That's right. 3 years.
So what's the other side like? We just talked about how much time has passed. What are you doing now?
I still work at Malwarebytes. I'm in my 7th year there. Life is very different for me, but I don't think it's mostly because of graduate school. I think it's mostly because, this is just how it gets when you get older. Mm-hmm. I don't get to see friends as much as I would like, or as much as I used to, because I don't live in an environment where it's basically college plus, which I do miss.
Definitely has its benefits and drawbacks, right? I mean,
it does, and I miss the friends I made, and I still see many or most of them, but not with the same frequency. But hey, that's life. That would be the case if we were getting older, I think, no matter what. But in other respects, it's really not all that different. I still, in my case anyway, I work a job where I still have a fair bit of freedom to set my own schedule. For example, I still live here in Providence. It's nice because my wife is still in school here, that we still have connections to an intellectual community. So I still know a fair few students and get, kind of the exposure still to the academic atmosphere, the question asking, the interdisciplinary study, all of the things that made graduate school so appealing. So for my mind, it's really not that different. But again, I'm not sure how generalizable my experience is.
Well, that's fine. I mean, everyone's experience is going to be unique no matter what, so generalities don't matter so much. I had asked before about regrets in general, so I don't think we necessarily have to go there again unless there's anything else you thought of. You mentioned you kind of felt, I guess, for lack of a better word, bad about leaving Ned behind and, maybe leaving behind his expectations for you. Do you get to talk to him?
I have talked to him about this at least twice, and he steadfastly maintains that this is just how it is sometimes, that I didn't owe him anything, that I should have no regrets on that score. I still do every so often have a twinge of guilt about that point specifically, because he was just so supportive. And I don't feel that I gave him anything to deserve the level of support he gave back to me. With that accepted, I really don't have any regrets. I think it was the right decision for me, and it still is.
Do you recommend that most people go through this? I feel like with you, Doug, you had this really interesting mindset. You're able to objectively constantly weigh the pros and cons in your mind and shoot for outcomes based on what you're experiencing at the time. And I just wonder if that's easy for other people to relate to. I feel like that might be one of your superpowers, right? Being able to be a little more objective about what you're seeing and what you're doing and what this means for your life in general.
Well, I guess I can't really comment on how other people self-assess, but I can say that, all of the people I spoke with as I was going through this process were going through similar processes themselves, and were able to self-assess just as well, and thought about what their options were, and thought about what they wanted out of their lives, and the ones who stayed in graduate school did so because they thought that was the clearest path for them. many people, I think, can also get paralyzed by indecision, and that's sort of a different problem that we can talk about if you want. But I think for the most part, the people who stay in because they think it's the right thing to do for them. So I think in general that if you're looking for advice on how to do that, keep a diary. If you write down, your perceptions at any given time, you start to see patterns in them. Basically, if your gut says that this is something you've been feeling or thinking, or that this is what you want to do, you're usually right.
That's a great point. So let's unpack the indecision thing a little bit. You said,
so I think some people can stay in graduate school because, quote unquote, they don't know what else to do. I'm sure you've heard many times as you ask around, people say, "Well, I'm here. What else would I do with my life? I don't have any other skills. I'm interested in learning. I don't have any idea what jobs to apply for. I don't really want a job. So what else would I do? Here I am." And in many cases, I think that's a reasonable argument, to be honest. If you like learning and don't want to work a 9 to 5 and don't want to work in, the kinds of industries that don't have a 9 to 5, freelance writing, web design, anything like that, consulting, then you might be right. Staying in graduate school might make a lot of sense in terms of, that's an option that just makes the most sense of the possible options for you. Mm-hmm. Then there are other people who I think use that as a complacency is too negative of a word. More like indecision. They're paralyzed by not knowing what to do next, and so they don't want to take a risk. If you're the kind of person who has trouble taking risks, I think it's probably worth thinking about whether that's something that is holding you back.
I mean, that is definitely applicable to pretty much anyone as well, right? One of the biggest things I've learned in the last year or so is that comfort is the biggest enemy to progress, right? Definitely just staying in their comfort zone.
I usually use the word complacency, but I understand that sentiment entirely, and I think probably at some point I wrote that down in some diary somewhere.
Yeah. And I love that diary thing because you need to be able to assess that feeling or just figure out what the feeling is, and just giving yourself time to journal or, write down whatever feelings you might have is the perfect chance for you to make something productive out of your feelings.
You're a scientist, right? If you want to establish patterns in self-reflection, you need to generate data.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Love it. So I guess let's move on to the last part that we like to ask the guests, and that's what you would tell your second or third year self from your standpoint right now. What kind of advice? What kind of advice would you have for yourself if you're
for myself
back?
In second or third year? Wow. Well, I suppose I would say you're thinking about the problem the right way. Don't let your fears hold you back. It will all work out in the end if you make it work out in the end. Mm-hmm. And I was telling myself that at the time. But it was a little bit more work at the time to make myself believe it.
Yeah, definitely.
So that I think looking back on it, I would have been able to give myself a little bit of confidence and solace in the notion that that choosing what makes you happy is the right road to life, and at the end of the day, the hard decisions you make will turn out to be the right ones if you make sure that you make them the right ones.
So did you have, and this is really the last question, did you have anyone that you could look to? I mean, other than Ned, who, obviously this great advisor you talked about, was there anyone that you talked to that might have left grad school and you were able to ask a few questions, or did you kind of just do this on your own from that standpoint?
I did this on my own. I didn't know anybody else who had left graduate school. I was the first of my friends to leave.
Okay.
I was not the last.
Yes.
I did certainly have people that I looked to for advice, and both personal and moral. My moral compass was my roommate, Andrew Hartnett, basically. He was still kind of my moral compass, and my wife, Christina Wolf. I spent a lot of time talking about this with all of my other friends as well, and with my parents. but I didn't have anyone who had done this already that I could use as a model. At least no one close enough to my age that it was relevant to me.
Yeah. So it sounds like if anyone's really considering, and I mean, like we mentioned, we all considered leaving grad school. You kind of need to, right? You can't just go through it being like la-di-da-di-da, I'm doing everything perfectly and everything's going great. And
well, unless that's the way you feel.
That's very true.
Again, that's really the only seriously generalizable piece of advice I can offer is to spend enough time knowing yourself that you consider what is making you happy, what isn't making you happy, and whether you're doing all that you can to maximize that.
Yeah. Great. So now, Doug, you've kind of become that example for someone who was in your boat a few years ago, right? If they're listening to this, they can see. And
I hope that I am an example for no one.
Oh, you are a great example and a fine human being.
Well, thank you. That's false, but thank you.
Oh, it's quite true. So thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast.
Hey, my pleasure, Jason. I'd love to talk to you anytime just because you're awesome.
Oh, you're more awesome. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you later, Doug.
See you, buddy.
Thanks again to Doug for his time and insight. It was definitely a personal topic, so we really appreciate his participation. Do you have more questions about possibly leaving grad school? Leave us a comment at phdinprogress.com/8 or email us at feedback@phdinprogress.com. We're also active on Twitter at PhD Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word by telling your friends and colleagues. Finally, the best way you could support the show is to leave an honest review and rating in the iTunes store, just like D. Jordan Miller did. Thanks for the support. As always, all this information can be found at phdinprogress.com.
You're thinking about the problem the right way. Don't let your fears hold you back. It will all work out in the end if you make it work out in the end.